2nd, 2019 at 5 o'clock. And let me first call the roll. Councilmember Nakamura.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lindemuth.
Here.
Councilmember Wheat.
Here.
Mayor's here. Councilmember Dodson.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Rigney.
Here.
Great, we got everybody. Yeah. You were planning, you were going to be in Hawaii, weren't you?
Yes.
Wow.
She stayed just for you.
Close.
President sick.
Just take the win, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Take the win.
Okay, well, thank you for being here, and I really appreciate we have Carolyn Sims, the Chamber President, several board members from the Chamber here. So we really appreciate you here, and whoever may be watching, we're glad you're watching. So we have 2 items on the work session, but one's perfunctory. So really one, so we're going to devote this entire session to discussion of the Entrepreneur Center that we've been talking about. And we are blessed to have Maria Myers with us. She's from the University of Missouri Kansas City Innovation Center, and she's going to speak. I met Maria at the Kauffman Foundation last year?
Just a year ago.
Last year, and it was quite impressive, the things she talked about. The Kauffman Foundation is a big foundation. They have a conference of mayors, and there were hundreds of people there from all over the place, mayors. And then I met you again at the Entrepreneur Week in Fort Worth over at the Health Science Center, and she was speaking there. And so asked if she could come spend a couple of days with us, which she did, and to culminate in this meeting. So hopefully at the end of this, we'll all have a real good appreciation and understanding what this means and how it may apply to us. And that's so we can all hopefully get on the same page of understanding. Now, I may have just did the introduction to Adrian, or somebody's going to do it.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Oh, she's so gracious.
Did you want to say anything else?
No, I think you covered it. I think
Okay, so I'm sorry. But I'm excited about this. So, Maria, thank you for coming. Come on up.
Come on up.
All right, well, thanks. Thanks for having me come and talk about my favorite subject, entrepreneurship, which I've been doing for years, either in entrepreneurial businesses or now serving entrepreneurial businesses in the work that we do at the UMKC Innovation Center. So we service, through the Innovation Center, about 3,000 entrepreneurs a year. We hear a lot of needs and wants, and we are also responsible for helping to make Kansas City America's most entrepreneurial city. And we do that by creating entrepreneurial infrastructure and measuring everything that we do to make sure that the investment that people are putting into this is actually paying off. So that's what we do. In building that, we've actually created a whole platform for communities to build entrepreneurial communities, which we license out as a licensing opportunity from the university to lots of different cities. So from Seattle to San Juan, we've worked with a lot of different cities in helping them think about what to do around entrepreneurship. So I'm really happy to be here, and I could probably talk all night long on it. So you just keep me on track here. So
Well, you have a flight at 8:30, right?
But I have a flight at 8:30, which my husband will be upset if I don't make. But let me hit the right button here.
Remote control, I don't think so. Yeah, it's kind of pointed over. Yeah,
Over this way?
maybe.
I never know what I'm pointing at when I'm gonna turn something on. I just start pointing it.
There you go. That'll do it.
Teen can fix anything.
Right. Okay, so I was out in Washington, D.C., and riding through the subway system there, which is pretty cool because I've been in a lot of subway systems. And in Washington, D.C., the really cool thing is you always know what the next stop is, right? And it seems to be wayfinding around the subway system in Washington, D.C. is great. Versus like New York City, where you better know if you're going north or south or east or west, because that is the only way to figure out if you're on the right line or not. And so I was thinking, you know, the reason I got started in this was there are a lot of resources for entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurs don't know they exist and don't know how to find them, and if they find one, they find the wrong one. So wouldn't it be great to have a subway map like they have in Washington, D.C., so that our entrepreneurs could figure out, how do you get into this system? How do you find what you need? How do you know when to cross over into the next part of the system so you can get where you need to go? Wouldn't that be cool? Okay, well, remember that. So let's get to why is entrepreneurship important
that'd be
these
cool.
days? That'd be cool. Really cool. So there are a bunch of trends that are happening across the U.S. and actually globally right now. One of them is that a number of our employers are either remotely working at home, or they are running some sort of 1099 business, or they're driving Ubers on the side, or Grubhub, or something like that. It's always interesting when I get in an Uber to say, what do you really do for a job? And they give me a whole litany of, I'm starting a physical therapy business, or it's amazing what Uber drivers are doing on the side. So we've got a lot of people in our world now, almost 40% of them, working on 1099s by 2020 is what they're saying. So we're seeing about 2,500 co-working spaces open daily, okay? Because people are looking for that hub, that place to come out of their home and a place to be, work, and connect, because so many people are working independently now. The other trend that's happened is that in 1985, there were only about 200, 250 courses taught in entrepreneurship in the schools. Today, we've got over 5,000 courses being taught in our post-secondary. And not only that, but K through 12 are now teaching entrepreneurship. So what's happened is entrepreneurship has become a mainstream field of study, and people are graduating with entrepreneurship degrees expecting to start a business. As a matter of fact, between 2010 and 2013, about 45% of our B school students, our business school students, went off to start a business. So this is becoming part of our lives, and it's what parents are saying. Maybe you should grow up to be an entrepreneur. And similarly to, you should be a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer, you should be an entrepreneur is a new thing. And I will tell you that in the early 2000s, in university systems, entrepreneurship was not a mainstream field of study, and they stuck it out there under marketing, right, and pretended it wasn't there. Is what they did. Now, our entrepreneurship professors are very well paid across the country, so it's becoming very much part of people's lives and their education. This is why economic developers care about entrepreneurship. It is the business that is less than 5 years old that is creating all the net new jobs in our country today. So it is the business that is very young that are creating the net new jobs. The bigger companies are shedding jobs, but all of our net new jobs are coming out of these younger businesses. So everybody says, wow, what is, how do you take that home? Well, I'm from Kansas City, and if you look at first-time employers in Kansas City in 2017, they created for Kansas City 14,574 jobs. Our first-time employers, so our entrepreneurial companies that hired an employee, 14,574 jobs. In 5 years, you start with 2013 and you work through 2017 and you look at that 5-year period, they created almost 76,000 jobs for Kansas City. And that includes the businesses in those cohorts that went out of business. So the businesses that stayed in business were actually generating enough jobs to cover the ones that disappeared over time. 76,000 jobs is nearly 7% of our workforce in Kansas City. So you can see the impact that our small businesses are having on our workforce and also on our jobs in our communities. And so this is why, as we came through the recession, many people were saying, how do we invest in creating new businesses, because that's where the jobs were coming from. And it was a recession that was difficult to pull the jobs out and get them to develop. So that's why it's important. So we talk a lot about building infrastructure. So you hear about programs and different kinds of things that are happening out there. But all of our programming does not happen in isolation. So there are a lot of programs for entrepreneurs. It might be an accelerator program, a small business development center, SCORE. The chamber may have programs for entrepreneurs. There are financing programs. There are marketing programs out there. There are programs at, like TCC would have programming for entrepreneurs. And the issue is that they're all fragmented and they're all kind of around, and the entrepreneur doesn't really know where to get started and which programs are right for him. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the concepts around building an infrastructure. So one of the first things is when I say the word entrepreneur to a group like this, there's a different vision of what an entrepreneur is in every head in this environment. That's right. And so what we try to do is explain that we see, after all our years of working with entrepreneurs, we see 4 different kinds of entrepreneurs. We have our micro enterprises and our sole proprietors. These are businesses that start small, stay small. They often are built to create personal income in the home. We see a lot of these starting during recessions as people get laid off, turn around and start consulting businesses. We see a lot of these started in communities of low income where they're trying to create lawn mowing services or daycares or something to create good personal income for what they're doing. They can be necessity entrepreneurs, or they can be entrepreneurs that happen to have a lot of experience. They start something on their own, and they can actually drive a significant amount of revenue, but may not hire a lot of people to do that. So those are our micro enterprises. And nationally, it's about 76% of the businesses of less than 100 employees are sitting in that space. Our Main Street entrepreneurs are cool, right? They're the ones that are lining our streets of our towns, and they make them vibrant. There are independent restaurants, our retailers, our doctor's offices, our lawyers' offices. The really cool thing about our Main Street community is that they're often the ones that are supporting the soccer teams, are sitting on the nonprofit boards, are really activating the community. And I think you can think of some of those in your head and think about what they're doing for your community. The Innovation-Led Group is a group that everybody talks about, right? These are the high-tech, fast-growth businesses. But look, they're only 1% across the country of what is out there. But we talk about them a lot. How do we get equity investment? How do we get things out of our universities and turn them into wonderful high-tech businesses? But they are a smaller portion of who's really out there. And then we have our second stage companies. Second stage companies are really interesting because they have owners who have figured out processes, and the difference is the owner wants to make this bigger. So they're the ones that are creating wealth in the communities because they're selling outside of the communities. They're selling internationally. They can be construction companies, uniform companies, tech companies, restaurants that franchise, all of those kinds of things. But the clue here is that the owner has a really strong desire to grow. They add jobs very rapidly. And they're the ones that are looking for investment from banks and some other areas to grow what they're doing. So we took a look at Colleyville quickly, kind of see what's out there. And if you look, we found about 51 innovation-led companies here. So there may be technology businesses or web development businesses and those kinds of things that are sitting clearly in that innovation-led space. We found 34 that are doing some serious growth over time. We found about 861 Main Street businesses. So that's a little bit stronger than you see in some other areas. And we saw micro enterprise being a little smaller. I don't have the exact numbers for the micro enterprises. We can dig to get them. But from our estimates, you've got between 1,000 and 2,000 people who are probably doing this work out of their home within your community. And they're building the smaller businesses. So that's kind of what this looks like for Colleyville. So for a residential community, it makes a lot of sense to me. So I wanted to show you that. Let's talk about economic development and what drives economic development for a minute. So economic developers look at 3 different ways to drive business in their community. One is to attract new businesses. One is to retain the businesses that you've already got. And the other one is to create businesses. And if you go to the International Economic Development Council workbooks on economic development, and you do word clouds around the words in those training manuals, this is what you find. For attraction, it's a lot about marketing. How do I market my community? How do I let everybody in my community know what I have available, and you drive them into your community? Retention, you see all kinds of issues. Are my sidewalks good? How do I get the employees I need to grow? Those kinds of things. But look at creation. Creation comes out clearly on community development. It's very strong. What we know about creation and the creation of new businesses is that it sits between workforce development, economic development, and community development. So you'll often see people talking about entrepreneurship in terms of community and how we bring communities together and how we improve our communities to move them forward. So it's all about community. So one of my favorite quotes is, "When will you stand?" "When will you stand" is a quote by Clifton Talbert. And he grew up in segregated Mississippi, and he watched his uncle build an ice house. And he watched his uncle, and they were black people in Mississippi, and he watched his uncle use every resource that he had in front of him to build a big business. And Clifton went on to build a very big business himself. He was involved with Segway, he was involved in all kinds of things, and now he's a really cool speaker and innovator that runs around and talks. And he says, every entrepreneur needs to win where you stand. And that's true. And if you see a really good entrepreneur, they are taking advantage of every resource that they can get their hands on to drive forward with their passion and to build the business that they're working on. So win where you stand, to me, is really important. And so when a community says, I want to do something in entrepreneurship, this is the first thing I talk about. What have you got that's here that nobody else has that you can share? So I get the chance to go around and talk to lots of different communities and see what they say. And when you ask people in Phoenix, where do you stand? They say, we're really good at building workhorses. We're not after the unicorns, but we'll take a $10 million company at any time. So that's what we do. And if you look at Red Cloud, Nebraska, a small town, Willa-Cather and Little House on the Prairie is that town. And so they built an entire tourism system around just those books that were written there about that area. And then in Tampa Bay, they'll say, oh, we've got railroads, rivers, transportation, all kinds of things that we can do there. So I asked a few people in Colleyville, what have you guys got, right? Tell us about what you have. And this is what I heard. I heard that you're an oasis in the middle of big communities. You are this small town with this rural background and feeling. And the community pride and the sense of community that I hear here is pretty amazing. People are pretty proud of this community and proud of the heritage, and they want to keep it green and beautiful and what it is. I also hear great school district and a very affluent community here, a well-educated community, and a very experienced community. You've got a lot of people here that know how to run businesses, are involved at high levels in businesses, and can turn around and help other people with that. So that's pretty cool, hearing about Colleyville's assets. So let's go back to this drawing the map thing. Okay, so if we want to draw this map of all the resources for entrepreneurs and get people in the right place, what can we do? So I was in Washington, D.C., and I ended up in Florida next. And I'm sitting here thinking we've got to draw this map of all the 250 resources that we have in the Kansas City region that are supporting entrepreneurs so that the entrepreneur can find their way on this map. And I couldn't figure out how to do it, so I was taking pictures with my phone and mailing them back to my team back in Kansas City and saying, we have to do this, we have to figure this out. And so I got back to my team and I said, what do you think we should do? And they said, we couldn't figure it out either. And I said, well, what are we gonna do? We've got to do this. And we all looked over in the corner and there was an intern sitting in the corner. And we said, okay, let's give it to her. So we did, and about 24 hours later, we had a map of our resources and how you get on, and we could break it by those 4 types of entrepreneurs, so you could find your line based on what type of entrepreneur you were, and we could figure out the money line. We could see if you needed money, where did you start, where did you end. We knew that if you were a growth company instead of a startup, where do you start? So we had the map for Kansas City, and we've now done this map for Puerto Rico, and we've also done it for the state of Missouri, and so that's what this particular map is. And it unfolds like a subway map, and the best part about it is nobody can figure out how to fold it back up. So it's a lot of fun to watch that process when it happens. Well, the interesting thing about this is that Dallas and Fort Worth are building this map right now. And Dallas and Fort Worth have a lot of entrepreneurial infrastructure, and they are learning how it lines up together for their entrepreneurs. And you're beginning to see them develop a lot of businesses, more investment and things like that, because they're developing this work as well. You guys are sitting right in between these communities, okay? And if you look at what's happening in the 3 counties around you, there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure being built in entrepreneurship, and this community does not want to let that pass you by at this point. It doesn't mean you have to run it, but I think you need to think about how you connect into these maps that are getting developed. And it's an easy intro to the work that's being done in these communities. We're actually implementing Fort Worth SourceLink right now with UNT, and then the Dallas Library has something called Dallas Brain, which is the SourceLink in Dallas. And this is all about connecting groups together. The other assets that you have here with your wealth in the community is that you have probably the capacity to be investing in some companies in different ways. And that's something that Dallas and Fort Worth will be very interested in, as well as companies in your own area. Understanding how to do that and how to make that work for you could be a very interesting thing. The other really key thing that you have here is that knowledge base. Every business that I talk to wants a mentor in something. They want somebody who's been through it before so that they can help them move forward more quickly. And it looks like your community is just rocking full of those. And so the way that you connect into these other infrastructures may be in some sort of knowledge sharing that could occur there. So when we talk about building an infrastructure for entrepreneurship, what we talk about is a method for doing it. And we've done it in 50 different communities. And so we know the method works. We know it works differently in every community. But this is what we say. We say you need to start out by identifying your assets and identifying your entrepreneurs. What do you have and who needs it, right? The second step that you take is to connect these things together, to connect your assets together and connect your entrepreneurs to those assets and together. So it's a lot about community building and networking to bring your community together to see where your entrepreneurship is. If you do that and you do it in a central place, you will find that you have a lot of data about what's going on. If your entrepreneurs are stopping by and saying, I need this, this, and this, and you have nowhere to send them, you know you have a gap in your infrastructure. And therefore, because you have a central point, you can begin to collect the data and understand what you need in your community to build better infrastructure. Once you understand the gaps, you can work with the community, you can empower the community to fill those gaps and make it a better place for your businesses and your entrepreneurs. And then we measure everything. So we think up front, what do we think we might want to measure here so that we know we're moving things forward? And so these are the 4 steps that we take a look at. So once you identify your resources and your entrepreneurs, we see a lot of communities that say, okay, I've got a list of everything that's available. Okay, the problem is you got a list and it's going to be out of date tomorrow. So you don't want a list. You want a true network. You want to open up a no wrong door network so everybody in the community knows where to go to get help. And anybody that approaches you, you can say, here's where you need to go. And it becomes a very community-driven environment through that. So it's really important. Don't build a directory. Let's work on the network. You have a lot of things to connect together. Places, investment, ideas, people, community colleges. There's a lot of stuff to connect. And so how do you do that? So most groups will put in a central hotline. Somebody's answering the phone. And in your area, it might be Score of the Chamber that's answering the phone already. So let's work with something that's already happening, right? It might be someplace in the city that's answering the phone. Somebody in this town is answering a phone by entrepreneurs who are saying, I need to get started. What do I need to do to get that to happen? Bringing together the resources that support entrepreneurs and talking to them and bringing them together is important. We do it on a quarterly basis. We have been in Kansas City for 15 years. 40 to 60 people that just support entrepreneurs get together once a quarter with nothing more than to find out what each other is doing and build that relationship so they can build a better environment for the entrepreneurs. And we ask them, what are the gaps? Where's the pain points? What do you need to do to build that? A lot of people say, I don't know who my entrepreneurs are. What am I going to do, right? So you initially start out by just doing some events. 1 Million Cups is an event that started out at Kansas City's Kauffman Foundation every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, a cup of coffee, and 2 entrepreneurs get up and talk about what they're doing. No pitching for money, nothing, and they ask the community. The question at the end is, what can the community do to help me? The community responds back and says, these are the things I can do to help. Somebody says, I need a bank loan. And the banker says, I'll help you get that loan. You know, that kind of thing is an event. Startup weekends, 54 hours to start a business, which brings in people from around the community, and they spend 54 hours over a weekend starting a business. Lots of creative events that you can do. One of the events that I've heard of recently that I really love is this concept of you get 50 people together, they each put in $100, you get 4 to 6 companies to pitch. Whoever does the best pitch that day gets the money. Okay, very simple, but an easy way to start bringing people in and see who's out there in your community to understand what's going on. So events are important. Some groups put in a central website. A lot of people work with social media to punch out to people what's going on in entrepreneurship in their area. Empowering the network to me is really, really important. Once you have the data that says you have a gap and being able to use that data to convince somebody to pay to help you fill that gap is very important. The other thing that happens as you really begin to see who your community is over time is you can really streamline the process. Oh, it'd be easier if you just did these things instead of going 5 different directions and that sort of thing. So we do that. In Kansas City, we knew we had a problem with capital. And so we couldn't tell whether there were no good deals or no good investors. And so we looked at all of the things that we could do to improve equity, debt, and grant financing in Kansas City. In a 3.5-year period, we found an extra $1 billion for entrepreneurs in Kansas City. And now you will see Kansas City on the map as far as investment for entrepreneurs.
You did say billion.
That was billion with a B, yeah. And so, but it was all based on the fact that we had the data from talking to the entrepreneurs, and we could go out and get the data that we needed to see who was getting the funding, what they needed, and where we were missing out on things. So let's talk about measures for a minute. So there are short-term measures and long-term measures when you're building an entrepreneurial community. Initially, the things you're going to really take a look at are who's participating, how many events do we have, who's coming to the events, are we reaching out to people to participate with us in the work that we're doing. You're also going to look at how many partners are you working with. Are you pulling people in from Dallas, Fort Worth, or even just Tarrant County Community College to make things happen? It's really about the network. You're really measuring the network that you're building. As you grow, you can say, what do I want to change in our community? What have I learned from these networking events and talking to entrepreneurs about what we need? This is what we looked at in Kansas City back in 2011. We knew we needed better network capital and better corporate engagement. And we're still sitting low on corporate engagement. We're about to embark on a big project there to start looking at corporate engagement and the ways corporations engage and things like that. But we looked at, these are the things we know are pain points for our entrepreneurs. And so we put the things in play to drive that. And you can see on our network capital after that effort that we took, there's a big change in what we're doing. Also, in 2013, Kansas City did not show up in any of the top 10 lists anywhere in entrepreneurship. Anywhere. By 2017, we're making all of the lists, and we actually moved up 14 spots in the Kauffman Entrepreneurial Index in 5 years. So there are ways to measure what's happening in your community, and I think that's important to see the ROI. We also can do other measures, and we're doing some of these in other regions as well. It's fairly easy to measure access to capital and what's happening in capital. You just have to know the data sets that you have to look at to do that. We've also been able to do things like find the number of jobs that we're creating, but we can also heat map for the region where hotspots are for entrepreneurship. And we also take a look at how well things are connected and who's using what resource to move forward. So there are lots of things you can measure. So this is, people say I only have an hour a week, and so a lot of you aren't in this 100% of the time like I am. So, what can I do to help with this situation? And I think you need to know what's here, and you need to know when somebody walks up to you where to send them. So have that startup process in your back pocket and be involved in that. This is one thing that's really important is an entrepreneur is only as good as the social network that they have, right? So their first investment, their first customer, their first employees come from their social network. So if you can expand their social network by connecting it to your social network, you will rapidly build a company if you do that. Attending meetups, starting meetups, sponsoring meetups, all great. If you can't do them yourself, help somebody else make that happen. And then really important to celebrate entrepreneurs in your communication. So already since I've been here the last 24 hours or so, I've heard about some entrepreneurs that are here. And are we talking about those entrepreneurs in our newspapers and in our newsletters and that sort of thing, really bringing them forefront. potential roles for community leaders, people in this room, become that information resource, understand the local support network, help people get into it. You can look at deals and say, you know, I know you guys are looking for bank funding or equity funding, but I just don't think you're ready yet. Help people understand how to get ready for that. Broker services, look at target markets that you have here that you could do interesting things on. So now let's talk about Colleyville. Opportunities that I've seen since I've been here. So first of all, I think that you can create a village hotspot. So you can begin to get your entrepreneurs to come out of the woodwork and see what they're doing. Find out who they are. Find out how many of them are working from home. How many of them are doing businesses here but driving into Fort Worth or Dallas every day to sell things. I also think that you have a beautiful opportunity to connect Colleyville into this 3-county-wide region of entrepreneurial infrastructure that is happening around you. And like I said, it wouldn't be hard to do that. It's a few connections and you would begin to see what could happen. I also know that most of our K through 12 and post-secondary are working in entrepreneurship now. And one of the things that I hear a lot in workforce development is we would like all of our students who have graduated from K through 12 even to have had an experiential learning project under their belt. Having an entrepreneurial community that opens up these kinds of programs for students would be cool. In Leavenworth, Kansas, little tiny town, they have an awesome pitch competition for students. Students work on a business, and at the end of the semester, they literally ride an elevator, and they have the time the elevator gets from the first floor to the third floor to do their elevator pitch. And these are high school students. And what they come up with is just absolutely amazing. And what a wonderful experience for them to learn how to present, to learn how to put a business together, that sort of thing. And so doing this in this community, especially with your school district and what you guys are looking at, would be really cool. So we've looked at this building. I got to go out and take a look at the building that everybody's talking about. And it does have, let me tell you, location, location, location with this particular building. There's great visibility, there's great access, there's great parking. And then there's this important thing that I call walkable community. And that's the fact that it's near restaurants, it's near trails, it's near a park, it's near a fitness center. You know, you've got all of that stuff, right? And a lot of communities are trying to build that around a blighted area that that they're working on. So that's pretty cool. It's also almost move-in ready compared to a lot of stuff that I have seen.
This isn't quite blighted, right?
No, well, it's clearly almost move-in
In
ready.
other words, that's our blight, but we have
It's
outstanding.
hardly used. That's right.
Exactly. That's good. So it could be a new home for Chamber and SCORE, and what wonderful resources to have in the middle of your entrepreneurial community. Also, there's the ability to expand around this building if you really wanted to. And then another beauty of it is it's a 5-year pilot. So you can try something for a few years and either know that you're going to expand or know that you're going to do something or contract with it, you know, as you go on. So that's kind of really a cool building that you have there. So opportunities that I see is that you actually may have some really interesting, fun ways to help the community create additional wealth if they would be interested in building out an angel network or an investment network here in the community and invest into deals that are happening. I know that there are a tremendous number of deals coming out of Dallas and Fort Worth, and so bringing that group up here to pitch to your group not only would be kind of interesting for people to take a look at the deals, maybe do some investing, but also we'll bring people up into your restaurants and things that are here and have people spend a little money in your area, which would increase some daytime traffic for some of your existing businesses that are here. You can also, again, you'll have this blighted building that's going to sit there for 5 years, have something into it. And then I also think that I know you're developing this northeast property potentially in Colleyville. I think that this has a play in that because you probably want to do attraction, retention, and creation when you think about doing that work up in the northeast corner. And so this could be a hub for helping you figure out what that looks like as well. So I think that's an important thing to think about. So entrepreneurs need customers, capital, and connections. And so when you look at how you might program the center, yes, there'll be great co-working space, and I've just shown you co-working's opening all over the place because people want it, need it, and are working on it now. But look at all these other things that you've got. Just the Colleyville Chamber events themselves that could happen there is pretty impressive. And having the resource of SCORE that's doing counseling and training, and a very active SCORE chapter here, will bring people in to that building. So that's pretty cool. I think you would then program it with some networking events. We mentioned a few of them to bring people out of their homes. I'll mention another really cool thing that we've seen done. If you want to get people to think about investing, we have little dinners that happen once a month with 8 people, 2 investors, 2 potential investors, 2 entrepreneurs, and 2 support organizations. Bring these groups together. Very intimate, no pitching, nothing like that, just getting people to know each other. And doing that sort of thing as community development in Colleyville could be really an interesting thing to do. It also can be a referral center into all these other resources. I would caution you not to develop resources you don't need to. You have a wonderful infrastructure of resources out there, but I would demand that those resources come to Colleyville. And so if you need small business development center resources, get them to come here. And utilize what's there, understand what's out there, and understand what you can take advantage of and bring them in. So I really caution people, don't create another 501c3 that's going to do the same thing that everybody else is doing out there. Really reach out and partner with groups and bring them into your community. The other thing that you can see here is eventually you could develop a really strong mentor network because of the expertise that's sitting in Colleyville. A strong angel network and an interesting, strong customer access network as well. Because of the residential area that you have here, you have people that are working in a lot of other companies, which could open up a lot of other customers to your smaller businesses. And so it's something to think about as well. And I think you could do some really cool student experiential learning programs, K through 12 and post-secondary, in this community as well. So those are sort of things. Okay, how do you measure this? Okay, I'm going to throw out a really interesting measure for you. I think you should measure this on how many families in Colleyville are participating in the eShip Center. Okay, it's sort of an odd measure, not the ones you would typically hear, but this is when I hear what your community wants, you have to create measures that give you what you want, okay? And so we know we've got remote workers here. We know we have aspiring and existing business owners here, and we know we have students here. So of all the families you have, 9,100 families or whatever, how many of them in some way are participating in this center? Remember I talked about community development. That's what this is kind of all about. So I think that that's fun. Eventually you can start looking at debt equity infusion into companies, how much is coming from Colleyville, how much is coming into Colleyville companies, how much from Colleyville is going into other regions. Interesting, you can look at business starts. These are things that are easy to measure. You should see sales tax increase if you're bringing more people come to your community to eat at the restaurants and things like that. If you get an investment community going, you should see wealth creation increase through investments. How you measure that can be a little bit tricky because you've got to get people to talk to you about that. And then you can look at the number of new jobs that get created through some of the businesses that you're looking at. So those are just some things to think about, some measures to think about. So what would your next steps be? I think you should go ahead and access that building as your hub, as your connection point. So at the same time, you need to begin to meet your entrepreneurs and figure out who these people are that are in your community and think of ways to bring them in, bring them together, and then listen to what they say. Because that will tell you a lot about how you should program the building. I think it's worth setting up an advisory board of potential investors and entrepreneurs and people who are going to care about this as it moves forward. I would get started on that referral process right away, get an understanding of what's sitting there around you, and make sure you know how to get people into that particular network. As you do the referrals, you collect data about what you're doing. As you do events, you collect data on the entrepreneurs. What kinds of businesses are they in? How many people do they employ? What do they need? And that will begin to tell you where the gaps are. And then you can really begin to build a solid program. If you just iterate, if you just keep going, gap, fill the gap, next gap, fill the gap, next gap, fill the gap, over time you'll build out a really phenomenal entrepreneurial infrastructure. And I think you're kind of at the point of just do it or decide not to do it. And once tomorrow's going to look the same as today if you don't take a step.
Sure.
So you just have to make that decision at this point. So wanted to leave a lot of time for Q&A and see what people thought. Oh, it's too quiet in here.
Comments, questions?
That's a lot.
Fire away.
I think probably since I'm a data guy, the question is, how do we start collecting that data?
Right.
Because that seems to be the main driver of building a lot of these other things, is to be able to set that infrastructure in place.
There are systems that will allow you to collect the data. Again, you may have some already. If you're answering a phone, you may have people collecting data. We've actually developed a system that will collect the data. So we have a whole client relationship management system. It's actually a community management system that allows you to feed data into a database on people. And that particular system has a ability to do surveys. So as soon as you know that somebody's there, you can survey out and ask them questions about what they're doing. You can take a look at snapshots, where they are today in jobs and investment, and where they are 6 months from now in that same situation. If somebody's receiving emails right now asking for help with businesses, there's another place to collect information. Social media is another place to connect.
So since this is kind of the first time we've all been together kind of talking about this, we've talked individually, I think my first thought is more to you guys than to you. You've given us the picture, you painted the picture, high-level picture, all the way down through what does it mean, what could it mean, how is it done in other communities, all the way down to what do we have in. So I guess my first question is, from the concept, does everybody see the concept is viable and useful to our community and our businesses? Or do you see a pathway to get there? I guess that's my first concept. Kind of, I guess, my first question of the concept, you looking up or you looking down? Does that make sense,
Well,
what
I see,
I'm asking?
yeah, I see the concept and I see the end result, but the in between, I'm like, Chuck, I mean, you have to start getting the data, and where do you start getting that data? That's my question. You know, social media, wherever, like, what do you do in order to open that front door?
Yeah, so,
That's
so,
where
so what you talked about, it's, I think, simpler than it sounds. You talked about having small dinners, you talked about having meetings. It's really about getting people together
Networking.
in some way, networking. When you do that, you gotta capture,
Right,
who is
just
it,
capture.
what, you know, what came out of that? And so that's what gathering the data means.
Yes. And you can do it on an
And
Excel
that's
spreadsheet.
really
Yeah,
significant.
that's very
I
significant.
mean, We've
Yeah.
got to come up with, to me, the measures. What are the measures that Colleyville wants to track to be able to expand? So, you know, let's use a great example. We have 80 new certificates of occupancy.
Yeah.
We need to develop something around that of what the data is that we want to collect from those people, because there's a great new audience that they're new businesses. What brought them here? What are they wanting to do? What are their expansion plans? Those kind of things what resources do you need, to your point? Where do you need to, what information do you need to get? Because I think that's a great first start.
Yeah.
Well, but there's, what, 9,000 households here, and we have no idea how many of those are already doing things or thinking about doing things or
When you say doing things.
whatever
what
else.
do
So
you
I
mean?
think there has to be a survey probably to start, to figure out what's going on.
Behind the doors of those homes?
Well, I mean, one thing she had it up here, and I've said this before too, if we're gonna engage in this, we need to go seek out selected individuals in the community that have the experience and skill set that fit into this and the interest, and have a, whatever you wanna call it, networking or a group, kind of a,
Getting
what do you
started.
call it?
Board, a group,
Yeah, and
whatever.
get them in the conversation.
Yeah.
And so with us and them, then you start finding out some of that information, setting some direction, deciding what do you do. I mean, it's gonna start out with some meetings or events at the facility, like you said. We want it in Colleyville. And I think there's a lot of resources from people around us that some of these things we don't even have to do. We just need to coordinate with them and get them done here so we get people in the door. And so you said in Kansas City, of course, that's a bigger city, but
Right.
it took, once y'all started that process of really the talking and networking, you said, I think maybe 2, 3, 5 years, it took a while to begin to build the base.
What
Is
we
that right?
find, and we've done it in big cities and little cities, and we find it's about a 3 to 5 year process to get it to solidify. So your first year is about identifying what you have, identifying your entrepreneurs, starting to collect some data and understand it. The second year is when you're really into, oh, wow, we found this gap, now let's figure out how do we fill that gap. And the third year is when you can turn around and say, wow, things are really different this year than they were, 2 years ago. So it takes that 3 to 5 year look at what you're doing.
And if I may add, what I think I'm hearing you say, and I'm not sure I'm hearing it around the table as much, is that I think what your vision is, and what you've seen in other communities, is that this plays a role in the greater community, not just Colleyville. The effect is not meant to be just Colleyville-centric, although very important, and obviously important to our measure. But the idea is to become an area where we help develop entrepreneurs in the greater North Texas area, and we are a place where people can come together, and we are a resource for them.
The other thing that I think is important, this is one component of, but the bigger picture is that we have a situation where we have a building that's in a very unique state. It's going to remain vacant for 5 to 6 years, regardless of what we do. It cannot be a bank. The landlord is collecting an exorbitant rent that is impossible to pay.
Guaranteed, right?
It's guaranteed.
Right.
And the bank that's paying it has no real strong incentive to do anything but continue to pay. And so, for that reason, it is kind of a blight, because it's a vacant prime location that, to the average resident, doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. So we have that. At the same time, we have our Chamber of Commerce, who is right now in the process of really undergoing a metamorphosis and expanding and doing a great job in rebranding and re-identifying themselves for the future, and they're looking for a location.
Absolutely.
And so the idea of those two things coming together with SCORE and an entity that already is housed here in the City Hall is already an exciting synergy.
Yes.
This is kind of an added benefit, added possibility that I believe allows the city and the chamber to really answer a specific question, and that is, are we ready for the next stage of economic development? Because a lot of the economic development theories that we've applied in the past are about retention and attraction, and those are about really following the traditional model. You're competing with the other communities, and you're trying to find a way to create the best deal, or the best incentive, or the best value-added benefit to the community. But the business community, especially in the next couple of generations, is changing dramatically. And so are we, meaning the city and or the chamber, positioned well for that transformation? And I'm not so sure we are. And so is this the answer? I don't know. I mean, but it's certainly trying to, or for us or the chamber, but it's definitely a step in that right direction to try to better understand how our market is changing and how our business climate overall is changing. But I can't tell you the number of times when I get a call from a resident about a drainage issue, or about a concern, or about an issue related to normal municipal service, where when I say, do you have some time to meet? And they say, I work out of my house.
Yeah.
And so there is, the data that was provided does really connect with the experience that we have, and there's a lot of people in this town have created businesses, multiple businesses, some of them.
Sure.
And so there is that network out there that we're not engaged in and not connected to. And maybe this is an opportunity to do that, I don't know. But for that reason alone, for all of those pieces that all come at it from different direction, I think it has value. Now, when you get into the financials, it's going to be something that, those pieces all have to come in with some type of participation in funding. What does the chamber pay as far as rent and participation? What do they pay as in-kind staffing? What does the city contribute both in daily operation, in-kind contribution, and or an actual cost of the rent? And there's a lot of financial pieces. And is there an opportunity to recover revenue by offering a temporary office, or those types of facilities that are also very popular And so all of these are factors in it, but before we get to the depth of those decisions, we really have to answer that bigger question, and that is this a road we head down or not? And so that's what this is intended to do, is to kind of bring that conversation, not necessarily for tonight's decision, but bring that conversation to a head so that we start thinking around these issues and understand better the possibilities.
I'm with you, I agree.
I have a couple quick questions. When you host the events, do you host them just to start by profession to connect those people, and then overall, once those people are connected, is there a certain number limit so it's somewhat intimate, like an RSVP type system where you've got their phone number, their profession, and everything, and then you reach back out later and then you connect different people to each other that way? I mean, how does it
work?
How does the event overall work? Do you have several professions at once or just one at a time?
It's sort of yes and, right?
Okay.
So, both and. If you have in your community, strong industry focuses, and you actually do, Colleyville, it ranks pretty high in a couple of them. You might want to do an event just bringing that group together and saying, oh, we happen to have a lot of jobs in this area, and so let's bring that group together, because they may want to talk about the future of their industry or something like that. If you're bringing, but you can also do the more broad events that maybe you ask whoever your key strong entrepreneurs are in this community. They're running interesting businesses, and you bring them in and you open it up to the community and say, we've got a couple of our entrepreneurs that are going to talk, and you see who shows up, right, to broaden it a bit. Or you may offer a break time. Anybody who works in their home, come on down for 10 o'clock coffee, kind of thing. So it depends on the audience. You can switch the audiences. I think the objective at the beginning is to understand who's here.
Let me ask a
One of the
question
other
here.
objectives at the beginning is just to have things so people know about it.
Right.
So you invite people and then find out.
Yeah.
What makes it different than the chamber, okay? Because it kind of sounds like it's the same thing that the chamber does. So how do you market it in a way that differentiates it from the Chamber of Commerce?
Well, I think it's the chamber's new home, if you will, and
Right,
that
so-
there's a strong emphasis in small business development and entrepreneurship. And the answer is yes. All of our communities, our chambers do this kind of work, right? And
Sure.
so,
That's what their purpose
that's what their purpose
is.
is, right? And so we see examples, but they don't do all the work, right? A lot of times, and so there's certain things that.
When you say all the work, what do you mean?
Well, they may not be the group that's running the investment club.
Oh, gotcha.
Right.
Mhm.
But they may be the group that does the events. Run the events because you do events. So again, and every chamber has a little bit different mission, and every chamber has a different set of their own strategic plan. And so if this is a large part of the strategic plan, then in some communities, the chamber runs the whole thing. If it's a smaller part of the strategic plan, then the chamber runs the part that they're the best, that is part of their plan. So I think in a small community like this, you may see a lot of chamber involvement, but I'm not gonna speak for you.
Tammy, I don't picture there being any full-time staff on this issue. I picture this being something where ideally, the chamber and the city and an organization like SCORE, which is a voluntary organization, kind of overlap to fill the void.
My concern would be, though, that when everyone moves in there together, that it is perceived as a chamber, maybe concern's not the right way, but I think it has to be marketed in a way that it's not perceived as being the Chamber of Commerce. Nothing wrong with the Chamber of Commerce, we love the Chamber of Commerce, but it's two different entities.
Maybe it needs a broader scope
About
than the
that.
chamber
That-
scope.
that's-
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it has to be marketed that way.
Right.
To make sure that it's not just,
We talked about, using terms like Colleyville Business Center or whatever. There's a lot of ways you can identify it wherein the chamber is part of that, and they have a sign there, but the entity is bigger
Larger
than the
than that,
chamber.
sure.
And it's also not City of Colleyville either. It's part of, all of those things in a separate entity. But I didn't want to imply that it's got to have its own major staffing and major
see.
process. Our goal is to find a way to do this within the current limitations that we have, so that we limit the cost.
sure.
But
Yeah.
it certainly
and-
has some challenges.
And earlier today, I was able to talk talked to Maria, and it sounds to me like you're saying that we need to know what's out there. And that's why I brought up, you know, a survey or some way to really find out if people are either doing entrepreneurial things or looking to do entrepreneurial things.
I agree with that, because you
And
don't
then I
know what's
think-
behind those
I think
doors.
once we had those and start inviting them to events, maybe the chamber events. But as Maria clearly points out, we have to get the data, and we have to keep on top of that data to figure out what's going on. And there's a few people in the room here that know a lot about data. So.
Speaking of data, another thing that we see cities doing is asking the entrepreneurs to solve their problems for them. So if the city has an issue with whatever it could be, transportation or whatever, asking your own entrepreneurs to help you solve the problem is another thing that we see
Our
cities do
student
all
mayor
the
of the
time.
year solved a lot of our problems. He was amazing.
So,
My thing is, I just want to make sure that the cost justifies the means.
Oh, me too.
That's,
No question.
that's probably my biggest elephant in the whole room. Other than that, I mean, I've seen these entrepreneur rooms. They're wonderful. It brings community involvement together, it brings a lot of entrepreneurs combining. I just want to make sure that it's not a big red herring that we're fixing to spend a lot of money and they go, well, it's worth the try.
And to your point, I agree, but I think we're talking about maybe two separate items. In my estimation, it's collecting the data, which doesn't require us to have anything but a computer, and then there's, do we need an entrepreneurial center? We need to start collecting the data no matter what, because I believe that's the way that Colleyville needs to head.
I
Even
agree.
if it's virtual, we need to have some sort of nexus and ability to have those referral points and those things. The entrepreneurial center is a separate issue that I agree. We need to look at the pricing, what is it going to provide to us? And we need to understand from the folks that we collect the data from, would you even use it?
Well, I'll make it real quick. And I'm just gonna say that I agree with you. It's the data that'll tell us the cost, that if it's prohibitive for what we wanna do with it. So I agree. We do need the data to figure out if it's cost, for us, what it's gonna be in the long run.
I don't know, if I understand what you're saying, I don't know if I agree exactly with that.
Okay.
Here's the way I see this. We started this out, just like Jerry said. Look at the individual perspectives of the city, what we're trying to do in the chamber, what they're trying to do. We have a building, and this is how we started talking, it's empty. It's a nice building. We do not want a nice building empty on Highway 26. That's city's perspective, right? What can we do about it? So we started investigating that building. Why is it empty? We found out what he described. Being leased, bank's not gonna put anybody in there. Owner's making tons of money, he's not gonna change it, blah, blah, blah. So chamber, they're looking for a strategy of how to get their own home. So that's the chamber desire and need. And so these two things fit well together. And it just so happens that this is an overlay that come on top of that I believe can have a lot of benefit to the community, but it takes time. You don't turn the key and immediately it starts happening, because really the first value is what we're talking about. To me, it's not a survey. It's actually getting people together and talking. And as out of that is what comes the relationship, people knowing one another, finding out what they do, what they're capable of. And I'm been involved in that kind of stuff a lot, and that's powerful, but it happens over some time frame. And so I guess our question is, I agree with you, I've always said, there's got to be a value proposition here. Got to be a value proposition, because we have to be able to look at citizens and say, this is the value proposition, this is why we would do this is why it makes sense. But when I think that way, all of these components are important. I wouldn't talk about any of them by themselves. And I always start out like I did. We got a building sitting here. We as a city don't want it empty. What's the options? And so, over, the question is, we can, we can compute how much the investment's gonna take. We've run some numbers, those need to be done again. But I don't disagree with you guys. I mean, that's, value proposition is really important.
I've been involved in these before, and that's why I know quite a bit about it, to be honest with you. We've got one on, right off of 75 in Mockingbird. Real good friends with those guys, and helped build that business. And sometimes there's some pretty steep cost. And so that's the only thing I'm asking is if we're going to invest $440,000, I think that at one time we said something like that close. Are we getting our bang for a buck? I want the chamber to have a place too. Right now, we got a good safe haven for them right here at City Hall. I love it. Other people scoffed at it. I think it's a great idea that's here. I just want to make sure that all the numbers are there. And I'm not doubting we need this. I'm not saying that. I just want to. Here comes my entrepreneurial. I mean, I own a business.
Yeah.
I know what it is to do that kind of stuff, and so I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I agree.
What was the major cost in that $440,000?
Well, we don't-
Renovation.
Describe the one
Renovation
that
of the
you were
building.
talking, the one that you are aware of and help. What is the purpose of that and what do they
What they
do?
do is they bring entrepreneurs together, just like this. They rent out small spaces inside the building. As a matter of fact, I think Mark knows who, my friend as well. They're very, very good people. It's just, I just want to make sure that this number, again, computation of what the chamber's going to put in with this and stuff. I'm not dishing this. I'm not doing it. This is actually very.
Could I ask a
Bring him in
clarification
here.
question? Is the space that you're invested in is more of a shared workspace that has an entrepreneurial bend to it, but it's a little different maybe from this entrepreneurial center where it's bringing resources together? Does that make sense what I'm
Yes,
clarifying?
it does, because we gotta decide
It's a
which
little
one
bit
it
different
is
from a
gonna be.
shared workspace, a
Well,
co-op space.
these are different individual businesses.
Yes.
That go in and they actually buy into a co-op
Right.
of a way, and they rent these
That's
places
what
out,
we
and
initially
then,
started looking at.
yeah,
And that's where I
how-
think we
that's-
started. I think this is
Yes,
a
that's where
little
we
bit
started.
different.
And that's what
but
I'm trying to figure
all
out.
important to
What's
conversation.
the shift and where's the cost of that shift?
But we never were talking about that because you're talking maybe an accelerator, incubator. We didn't talk about the different
I can talk
pieces of
about different
entrepreneurship. And so I think that's important to sort out what it is. But I think
That's
the
where
way
I'm
you did
lost.
describe it, that sounded like an incubator or accelerator type.
But one thing that I think you're mentioning is that in this scenario, one of the things we would have to calculate, because we really don't know the cost as of yet. Earlier on, when we looked at this last year, we looked at it as having two components, one being the chamber and the second being the temporary rental. And so we put together a budget based upon that involved all of the details, and we were looking for a break-even venture. And so we looked at different options as to how that venture would break even and not lose or gain any money, just really be like a not-for-profit. This is slightly different than that, and so for that reason, when we look at the financials again, because this conversation is about kind of airing that conversation and talking about these things, is I do think that regardless of where we go when this is over, there probably will still be a component of this where we provide, the chamber has space, but they pay a rent. We have the potential for rental of shared office space, and they pay rent. And then we have the entrepreneur center there that is part of that overall. And those things are part of that mitigation of cost and part of that calculus. This conversation is about us hearing that and those different perspectives. So we then put together the financials based upon that variability. And so, obviously the chamber has to be interested, one, in the location, and two, in some type of a rent contribution. The calculations as to what the renovation cost versus the rental cost and the projections on the amount of frequency and regularity we can rent the units also go into that financial. And so if for some reason we did not do any rental at all, and we did not have any shared office shared space, and we just went with the Chamber of the Entrepreneur Center, that would present a much different
Very
financial perspective because we would have to spend more money. And so
I guess I'm a little confused because as we all started on this building, it was going to be an entrepreneur center mixed with this renting out places. There would be an open spot for everyone. So now we're just eliminating
Nope,
Well, I think
possibly.
we're
on
trying to
that.
figure it out.
Nope,
That's what we're
possibly.
doing here.
Nope, and this conversation is about, is really about having that discussion, because the question that's gonna come down to this at the end is, if you have these components, 3 components, and 2 of those components are providing cash value, true, lease space return, that's something you can include into the option as understanding how the process either gets to a break even or is hovering around break even. If we then abandon that and we just go with purely entrepreneur center and chamber, there's a cost benefit in that, and we're talking today a little bit about what the benefits are, but we'll have to look at the costs. And so our goal is to come back after this conversation and put those in different spreadsheet options and say, here's the financials, here's how we quantify what the cost of that entrepreneurial transition is.
I'm with Chuck, I just need to see the data.
Yeah, and this is early, we're just.
And I think
Yeah.
doing that involves talking with the chamber, because in the end, for this to work, we got to come to some agreement between the chamber and the
Sure,
city.
absolutely.
And that's
And I
really, to
think we
me,
need to help the
that's
chamber.
really kind of the next step, because in that process, we'll bang out some of this stuff and end up with some kind of proposal that's come jointly from both organizations to say, hey, the group that does that, we think this makes sense, what does everybody think? I mean, that's the process I see.
I see one more thing. How do we, before we set this up and say we're gonna go do it, I think we need to talk to Dallas and Fort Worth
And your friend.
and UNT. UNT is the driver from Denton, is that right?
Fort Worth, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
the-
they're
and-
involved with Fort Worth, that's right.
And the Health Science Center, I haven't talked to UNT, but I have talked with the others at some point or another. But that synergy is critical. We're talking about an ecosystem of this big.
I understand.
And we're here.
I know.
And we don't want to duplicate anything everybody else does, but we want to tap into it.
And that's-
And I really think the big resource for, like you said, the resource for Colleyville is the people.
Yeah.
That's
Sure.
huge.
I agree.
But I think we have to have a clear,
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be very clear as to which way it's gonna go, or to me, it's never gonna work. if we
Well,
don't-
and
I don't
that's
think
why I
we're-
think,
I mean, I think that's clear from this conversation,
Yeah.
but we don't have that yet, but we
No, we
have more
don't.
to think about,
But
which
I'm
is
just
really
saying we
valuable.
need to, it's got to be very clear.
Absolutely.
In my opinion.
yeah, so one question literally is, my first question after she presented, it up or down. Now, down means we say, fine, interesting, we're not gonna proceed beyond today. What I'm hearing, good discussion, all of it's good discussion. I'm not hearing a down.
No.
I'm hearing an up with caveats, which I agree with all of them.
Lots of caveats.
Well, enough with,
For me.
enough with next step. So that the up simply means,
Explore.
we do a next
Yeah.
step. And I think.
I agree.
By the way, you guys can all chime in, or Kay or Carol, chime in. I think the
It's
next
not
step.
silent there, so.
I think the next step is to work together with the chamber, city and chamber, to figure out really get down to an agreement, because when you get down to an agreement, you're now talking enough details on how this is gonna work. And that's where, the rubber
Confusion
meets
comes
the
in.
road with all of us. And can we come to a joint understanding that makes sense for everybody?
Yes.
That's what would come back. I would really love to see something like that done by June. Is that possible? I mean, it is on our side.
As far as.
Is that like a work session or something?
Well,
Maybe
no,
just a
no.
meeting, like a lunch
Well,
meeting,
yeah,
or
I
what are you
mean,
thinking?
I don't know, Kay and Carolyn,
Coffee.
you're the chamber representative,
Coming
and
back
all
with
of you are,
numbers
but,
and details.
you
I
know,
just
we
know
got
what
various
conversation.
committees, and one of them
Chamber.
Just
will
the- okay.
probably work on this. And then,
That's a good
of course,
idea.
we will work on this side, and we gotta discuss jointly and see if we can come to a common
We already
agreement.
have a committee together,
Yeah.
and we are already discussing that, and we
Right.
wanted to wait till after this meeting to proceed to see where we were,
Right.
timelines and so forth.
Yeah.
And from the chamber's perspective, our goal is to connect the the businesses to the community.
Yes.
And provide resources and to add value.
Yes.
And this does all of those things for
Okay.
us, and brings it all together. And I think we can grow the chamber, we can also grow our community financially. I think we'll have more investment in the community. I think it'll show from the city's perspective that they support local businesses and support businesses in general, which is a positive thing, so.
So this is of interest to to
Oh,
continue exploring.
Absolutely, and what I'm hearing from you all, and I think it is of interest to us, is we need to sit down together and work out
See
the
how it can work
numbers.
out.
Yeah, how
Because
do
we
the
want to
numbers
protect you
work?
guys. You guys have took your building, you got rid of your building, and you came back to where it was just Colleyville, and that's big for us. For me, it is anyways. I'm speaking for myself, and I want to make sure we protect you guys.
You don't
Yeah.
need to, and I'll say that, you don't need to worry about protecting us. I think what we need to think about more is how do we work together
Sure.
where it's beneficial to both.
How do we launch you into
Well,
the
and
next
it's-
phase?
Absolutely.
That's part of it.
No, you're not
We just don't
launching
leave you out
us.
No, no, no.
floundering around or what have you. That's.
But
that's
to
why
the
you
next
guys
phase
are
But
here.
how
is what I
can we
mean. How do
work
we
together
create the synergy?
to mutual benefit?
A strong city is a strong chamber, a strong
Absolutely.
chamber is a strong city. And so we're mutually beneficial to each other. And as the chamber grows and increases membership, so too does the city grow. And as the city grows, so too does the chamber. So it's beneficial
Win-win.
for us to work together.
So I'll give a quick little thing real quick. We had a couple of people that were giving us a hard time about you coming in, but I tell them all the time, they're at the right spot because everybody that wants a permit to do something, they gotta come by the chamber, so.
Oh, you are so right. Everybody is coming
Who
in.
gets to say hello first?
Right.
It's our chamber.
Yes, so far, okay, so far, we know. We're meeting them as they come
I
through the
love
door.
that.
You're so right.
Just so
Yes.
you know, we do not have any cost estimates that have us anywhere in that $400,000 range. So when we talked previously, we talked about different options as far as different buildings. We talked about renovation costs. We
Yeah.
talked about rent. We talked about, obviously, income. And we went through all those different scenarios. And so we'll provide that again after we have this conversation,
Cool.
probably sometime in June. But
Perfect.
we don't have any of that right now because all of those things were really subject to, you can't really talk to someone about a lease agreement without having some general consensus that there's a lease worth talking about. So that's what this was really about.
This was our, second or third time to talk about it, and I thought we were moving that direction, because we'd already been talking about including these guys before.
Yeah, but we never really talked to them formally like.
Okay, so I didn't realize.
We talked about
Yeah,
them
we
having
talked
that
about
space,
it.
yeah.
We've talked,
So this has been talked about several times.
we've talked about it, but, like you said, you say entrepreneur, there's millions of different things that come in.
Absolutely.
Everybody's
Sure.
done. So my hope out of this meeting, or success in this meeting would be, hey, get an expert in here that's done all this stuff, can explain what it means, and we can answer questions, so we have more of a common view of what this is we're talking about. So we have a better framework now to get together and start hammering out, okay, what do we do and how do we do it, and
Yeah.
how's it cost? What's it cost?
And
Well,
the manpower that the chamber would provide by opening and closing and answering the phones is an added value, and it should be
Absolutely.
factored into the financials as well, as part of it.
And
Yeah,
beneficial
agreed.
to both
Right.
sides as well, which is key.
Right.
I mean,
Well, I was surprised with the numbers that you gave, because when I came in here, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know, but the numbers,
Yeah, well, see, that's what got my attention. when
mine too.
First, I've been involved in this kind of stuff a long time with a lot of stuff over the years. But then what's going on now nationally, that's what the Kaufman Conference told me. Man, there were hundreds of mayors there. It's a huge focus everywhere in the country, and our workforce is changing dramatically. And that's causing shifts in chambers and what chambers do and what they deliver now, and cities too. And so I do think that, we need to embrace enough open thought process so that, hey, we Colleyville don't get left behind either in terms of what these changes, what effects these changes are having.
Sure, it's not
I
just
also
brick and mortar, it's not just brick and mortar businesses anymore, it's shifting, and a lot more people are working out of their homes. And we tap
Absolutely.
into that resource, those financial resources in this community, and that's gonna make us even stronger, so.
And I tell
I
you,
also think there's a uniqueness that this does not happen often with a partnership with the city and a chamber working with entrepreneurs like this. And I think this is a great beginning, stepping out and doing something that's very different along the line of that what other chambers, what other cities can learn from the partnership that we're creating here as working with entrepreneurs, because this is obviously, after listening to you yesterday and today, this is the
The
life.
thing.
This is the
This
way
is it.
it's going. And we run into it all the time. So it's a whole different way as to how we do business as a chamber too. because it's a different type of value that we have to come up with. And so it's getting us to rethink some things that we have also. But, yes, yes, I love it, and I've already picked out my office, so I'm fine.
We're good, okay.
You just want to take the development department with you, right?
I just want the whole grid to go, that way I can keep up with who's coming in the
Your
door.
office too, don't worry.
If I can ask, short of engaging you in some sort of consulting arrangement, can you help us, at least guide us into what do we do as first steps of the data gathering? I mean, that's where I see, it's all great and wonderful, but we don't know what to put into a survey to go ask people.
Right.
So if you can help us and give us some guidance around that, it would be deeply appreciated. I'm more than happy to volunteer to join in on that. It is what I do, so I think I would love to work with y'all and see what we can do around creating those surveys for different audiences, existing businesses, where we can identify new opportunities, all of those things. We need to collect data from multiple sources, and it's not always the same data.
And some of it you may be sitting in front
We
of
are,
you,
yeah.
when people come in for a permit or a license, you've got an interesting point right
Sure.
there, for instance.
Exactly.
Or if they become chamber members, an interesting.
Can I ask, are you hoping that data will then direct you in what the center would function as?
Yes.
Or are you
Yes.
thinking the data would be a yes or no answer for you?
No, I think
No,
it's
it can't.
much more of a
to
guidance
focus
of
on
what
the
things,
services are.
what is of value and what is of no value.
So, a question, so, you're with the University of Kansas Innovation Center, right? So, associated with the university, and so you just asked a question about, hey, consulting or work, that's what you're doing today. And I called you up and said, would you come down? Absolutely, I'll come down.
She is a consultant,
yeah.
and since I know what consultants are,
Right.
of course they have to be
So,
paid. How about that?
So, as our innovation center, just explain what we do. So we have a small business development center, a procurement technical assistance center. We run a proof of concept program called Digital Sandbox KC that invests about 20K into early stage concepts. Whiteboard to Boardroom, that is a network of about 21 research organizations in Kansas and Missouri that work together. And then we run this thing called SourceLink.
Yeah.
Because what happened was we got this stuff going in Kansas City, and within about 2 years, we had people organically say, will you come and do it for us? Will you come and help us? Will you come and because that happened back in 2004, and so we've seen a lot,
Yeah.
in the last 12 years of doing this, and so we're constantly asked, will you come help? Will you
Yeah.
come help? And we do that. Now it's just a formal part of our organization. And we do that through our SourceLink program, and that program runs on consulting fees and licensing fees for the technology and the methodologies that we use. So we have just naturally
Well,
developed
that's what I
that.
wanted to say. So basically, the answer is yes.
Yes.
Of course.
And I'm not opposed, understanding, but I'm hoping that there's just some, here's 10 things that we found very valuable to collect
Yeah.
when you're getting started.
Well, we also wrote this book called Beyond Collisions, and some of that information is in the book, and that's available on Amazon. So last year we said we should just write down some of the stories that we've heard and some of the things. And it goes through that identify, connect, empower, and measure. It also talks about how to market what you're doing, and the leadership that it takes to drive an environment like this. So it's a quick read. I read it again last week and said, oh, we did a pretty good job on this. So lots of good stories in there. One of my favorite stories in the book is a guy out of St. Louis. He said, we're from the Midwest, and so there's no money in the Midwest, right? It's all on the coast. And so he said, so I'm on an airplane and I'm sitting next to somebody. I said, oh, what do you do? And they said, I'm an entrepreneur. He said, where are you going? I'm going out to the valley because I know I can get money out there. And he said, oh, good luck, And then he said he was on a plane the following week, and he was sitting next to somebody, and he said, what are you doing? He said, I'm an investor. And he said, where are you going? To the valley, because I can't find any deals here to invest in. And so he said, what we needed to do in St. Louis was get our investors and our deals together, because clearly they were all on planes going somewhere else, and they never connected, at that point. And so much of that is what is going on, right? And it talks a little bit about data and what you can collect and things like that. So that's something to take a look at as well.
I
And
tell you,
that's the other thing
when I-
that we have here in Colleyville, is we have the other side of this, is the investors
yeah.
that would want to be a part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's probably the biggest strength Colleyville has, and the people and the expertise and the experience. We got high-level executives, we got a ton of business owners that have done this.
Right.
And here's what I really think. If we're successful in this, over a few years, Colleyville could become known for that, not in the entrepreneur world. And that's huge. I can tell you, that's huge.
So I think one of the things that I'm sort of saying is you have a building concept which can become a hub, but really think about how you can leverage that
Don't limit
beyond
it.
just a building.
limit it,
Let's open it up and get beyond the building and think about what this can do. But it could act as a very nice central meeting hub place, what I call the first stop shop, not the one-stop shop, but the first stop shop, a place that people know, if I'm gonna do this, I have a place that I can go. The other thing that we find in communities is it's really hard to go, oh, there's entrepreneurship in your community, right? Really hard, because it's in all these different places, and what you're doing is creating a place where you can go, oh, there's entrepreneurship in our community, and go there. So there's some intangibles that come along with what you're investing in, so think about some of that.
It's amazing in Colleyville, you know, Ravinti, Lilium, I mean, you could just rattle off, they're all entrepreneurs that we were in here talking drainage just yesterday or whatever. And one of the guys was here and talking drainage, and as I happen to know, well, you started a company that flies drones and does mapping, because we were talking about, hey, what's going on? He said, yeah. He said, yeah, but yeah, I did, but I've got another one started now. And that's blah, 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 you know.
And how inspiring is that to your
Yes.
students, right?
And it's just
It's just
all over the
unbelievable. So, yeah, think beyond the box of the building, and as you kind of think about what's happening here, yeah.
Well, great.
Excellent.
Thank you for coming.
Sure.
I really enjoyed it.
Very
Appreciate
enlightening.
it.
Thank you so much.
Thank all of y'all for coming and having the conversation. So I'm serious about, we need to get together. Let's target June and make this next serious conversation happen. So we got some details wrapped around this on both sides.
Agree.
Any final questions from Maria, from anybody?
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It's
Thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Good luck, yeah.
Lots of information on it.
You can catch that flight now.
I'll make it, yeah.
Yeah, you'll make it.
I'll make my flight.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're fine.
It's perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more agenda item, and that's, we normally talk about the regular agenda. The only thing I want to alert everybody to, we have on the agenda tonight, Trans supposed to come to do a presentation on the 26th. He's not coming tonight. He's going to put that off until, next month. Phone with him yesterday, me and Jerry, talking a lot about some details and questions, and he did not some of that, so he said, let me put this off. And so that's fine. So that's what's happening.
There's an awful lot of questions out there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
that we see.
And I didn't, he wanted to be able to answer them.
Sure.
That's good. And I want to be able to give citizens the right answer
Yeah.
when we're looking at,
Okay, I think that's it, and I'm going to close this and go into executive session, so.
The main, just quickly, the main thing is the updates for the land development code.
Tonight, yeah.
Chapter 2.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Two.
That's to take the most time, that's my.
Yeah, if we have a shortage, on sidewalks, there'll be a little discussion in that.
Chief's
leaving,
I see it in his
President
eye.
work session.
Yeah, he's trying to get down.
He's like, oh.
Chicken.
I'm sorry, it's right here.
We are moving to executive session in accordance with Texas Government Code Chapter 551, Subchapter D, Section 551.071 Legal, Section 551.072 Real Estate, and Section 551.087 Economic Development. So we're now in executive session. All right.